The shot that silenced the Alpine Precision Academy happened on a perfect Tuesday morning when 22-year-old Juliette Moreau stepped up to the 2.5-mile firing line with a rifle her instructors had mocked as flea market garbage. What happened next would shatter every assumption about money, equipment, and who deserves to be taken seriously in the world of extreme long-range shooting. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine shooting ranges of the Alpine Precision. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Academy nestled in the French Alps near Chamonix. Juliette Moreau arrived at 0500 hours, 2 hours before the mandatory briefing, clutching a worn canvas case that had seen better decades. At 22, she stood barely 5'4" with paint-stained fingers from her part-time job at a local art studio. Her second-hand tactical vest hanging loose over a frame that spoke more of late-night studying than protein shakes and gym memberships. The Academy was Europe's most prestigious long-range shooting school, where wealthy enthusiasts and military contractors paid €8,000 per month to learn precision marksmanship from former Special Forces instructors. Juliette was there on a partial scholarship she'd fought tooth and nail to obtain, working 3 jobs to cover the remaining costs. Her fellow students arrived in custom Range Rovers and Mercedes G-Wagons, unloading rifle cases worth more than most people's annual salaries. Juliette's rifle case, by contrast, was held together with electrical tape and hope. She made her way to the equipment preparation area, a sterile building where students cleaned and zeroed their weapons before training. The space buzzed with the soft conversations of privileged discussions about weekend trips to Swiss shooting competitions, debates over whether the new Schmidt and Bender scope was worth upgrading from their old Night Force optics, casual mentions of custom rifles that cost more than luxury cars. As Juliette unpacked her rifle, conversations gradually quieted around her. What emerged from her battered case was a Remington 700 from the 1990s, its original stock replaced with a basic synthetic one, topped with a scope that most of her classmates would have considered entry-level at best. The entire setup, including modifications, had cost her €1,200 less than what some students spent on their scope rings. Is that functional? Asked Henrik Larsson, a Norwegian heir to a shipping fortune whose Custom Accuracy International rifle cost more than a small car. His tone carried the practiced politeness of someone trying not to be obviously condescending. It gets the job done, Juliette replied quietly, running her hand along the rifle's worn but meticulously maintained stock. She'd bought it used from a retiring competitive shooter and spent months learning to work on it herself, unable to afford professional GUNSMITHING. Marco Santini, whose father owned half of Milan's manufacturing district, peered over from his workstation where he was assembling a rifle that looked more like a piece of modern art than a shooting instrument. My gunsmith says those old Remingtons have terrible tolerances. The actions are inconsistent, and the barrels are mass-produced garbage. Juliette's jaw tightened slightly, but she continued her preparation routine. She'd heard variations of this conversation dozens of times since arriving at the academy 3 weeks ago. Her rifle wasn't just different, it was embarrassingly different. While her classmates discussed the merits of various custom barrel makers and exotic materials, she quietly worked with what she had. The truth was, her rifle had been chosen not for its pedigree but for its potential and her budget. She'd researched extensively, reading every technical manual and ballistic study she could find. The platform might be common, but her modifications were carefully calculated. The trigger had been professionally adjusted, the barrel was hand-lapped, and every component had been selected for function over form. But perception mattered at the Alpine Precision Academy, and perceptions were formed quickly. Chief Instructor Klaus Weber entered the preparation area with his characteristic military bearing. a former German GSG-9 sniper with 25 years of experience. Weber commanded immediate respect from students who were accustomed to being deferred to in their civilian lives. His eyes swept the room, cataloging equipment with the practiced assessment of someone who had seen every combination of shooter and rifle imaginable. When his gaze fell on Juliette's setup, it lingered longer than she was comfortable with. "Mademoiselle Moreau," Weber said, his English precise despite his accent, "I trust your equipment is properly zeroed?" "Yes, sir," Juliette replied. "Confirmed at 300 meters yesterday evening." Weber nodded curtly, but she caught the slight eyebrow raise that suggested he was mentally calculating whether her rifle was capable of the precision required for the Academy's advanced curriculum. The assumption stung because it was probably shared by everyone in the room. As students began filing out for the morning briefing, Juliette overheard Henrik speaking quietly to Marco near the door. "I give her 2 weeks before she realizes she's out of her league. This isn't a place where you can fake it with cheap equipment." "The scholarship students never last long anyway," Marco replied. "Weber's just being politically correct by accepting them. Once they see what real precision looks like, they usually drop out on their own." Juliette pretended not to hear, but the words burned. She'd worked 2 years to earn this opportunity, had sacrificed everything to be here. The idea that she was just a token scholarship student, destined to fail because her equipment didn't cost enough, made her stomach clench with familiar anger. She finished packing her rifle and followed the group toward the briefing room, her head high despite the whispers. Today's lesson would cover fundamentals of extreme long-range shooting, the kind of precision that separated professionals from weekend warriors. She was ready to prove that skill mattered more than price tags. What she didn't know was that by the end of the week, her cheap junk rifle would make a shot that would be talked about for years. The Academy's main briefing hall was a testament to precision and tradition, its walls lined with photographs of legendary marksmen and display cases containing rifles that belonged in museums. Juliette took her usual seat in the back row, her notebook ready, while her wealthier classmates clustered in the premium seats closer to the instructor's podium. Chief Instructor Weber began the morning briefing with his typical Germanic efficiency. "Today we advance to intermediate long-range engagement theory, targets at 800 to 1,200 meters. At these distances, equipment consistency becomes critical. Small variations in ammunition, optics, or rifle precision are magnified exponentially." He clicked to the first slide, showing a detailed ballistics chart. At 1,000 meters, a rifle capable of only 1.5 NOA accuracy will produce a spread of approximately 15 inches, unacceptable for precision work. Professional-grade equipment maintaining sub-ENOA accuracy is not a luxury, it is a requirement. Juliette felt eyes turning toward her, subtle glances that carried unmistakable meaning. Her rifle's factory specifications claimed 1 AOA accuracy, but that was under ideal conditions with perfect ammunition. In reality, she knew her setup was capable of better performance than the specification suggested, but proving it required opportunity and respect she hadn't yet earned. "The rifles you see in our display cases," Weber continued, gesturing toward the wall of historic weapons, "represent the evolution of precision. Each advancement, better metallurgy, improved optics, custom barrel work, pushed the boundaries of what was possible. Today's custom rifles are the culmination of decades of refinement." Henrik raised his hand. "Sir, what about platforms that haven't kept pace with modern developments? Are there situations where older designs become limiting factors regardless of shooter skill?" Weber's response was measured but clear. "Absolutely. A skilled marksman can maximize any rifle's potential, but they cannot exceed its mechanical limitations. This is why serious precision shooting demands serious equipment investment." The subtext was unmistakable. Juliette's face burned, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd heard this argument before, that poverty was a character flaw in a sport dominated by wealth, that her rifle was a handicap that skill alone couldn't overcome. After the briefing, students moved to the 800-meter range for practical exercises. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The targets were standard precision shooting bullseyes, black circles on white paper that would reveal every flaw in technique or equipment. Juliette set up her shooting position at lane 12, the furthest from the instructor station, while her classmates arranged their custom rifles on premium shooting mats and adjustable rests. Weber walked the line, observing setups and offering initial guidance. When he reached Henrik's position, his tone was encouraging. "Excellent choice on the Accuracy International. That chassis system will give you consistent results. At Marco's station, the Sako TRG is a proven platform. Your gunsmith did excellent work on that barrel." When he reached Juliette's position, the pause was longer. Weber examined her rifle with the clinical attention of a mechanic assessing of questionable repair. "Mademoiselle Moreau, have you considered upgrading your optics? That scope's tracking reliability may become an issue at extended ranges." "It's been consistent so far, sir," Juliette replied. "I've tested it extensively." "At what ranges?" "Up to 600 meters, sir." Weber nodded slowly. "Today we're shooting 800. The difference may be educational." The first relay began firing. Henrik's shots grouped tightly in the X-ring, earning approving nods from Weber. Marco's performance was nearly as impressive, his expensive rifle delivering the precision its price tag promised. Other students showed varying degrees of success, but their equipment performed predictably. When Juliette's turn came, she felt the weight of collective skepticism. She settled into her shooting position, adjusting her cheek weld and checking her natural point of aim. The rifle felt familiar in her hands. She'd dry-fired it thousands of times in her tiny apartment, perfecting her technique when she couldn't afford range time. Her first shot struck the 9-ring, slightly left of center. Disappointment rippled through the observers. Her second shot was better, catching the edge of the X-ring. The third found dead center. "Acceptable," Weber commented, but his tone carried the subtext that acceptable wasn't impressive for someone who needed to prove herself. Henrik approached during the break between relays, his manner friendly but patronizing. "Not bad shooting. Have you considered what you'll do when we move to the really long ranges? I mean, that rifle is fine for hunting, but extreme precision work. What ranges are we talking about?" Juliette asked. "Next month, we'll be shooting past 1,500 meters. By graduation, some students attempt the 2,500-meter challenge. That's where equipment really separates the serious shooters from the hobbyists. The 2,500-meter challenge." Juliette had read about it in the Academy's promotional materials, but assumed it was reserved for the most advanced students with the most sophisticated equipment. A shot at that distance required not just skill but equipment capable of delivering projectiles with enough velocity and accuracy to remain effective across nearly 2.5 miles of air, wind, and atmospheric conditions. "Has anyone ever made that shot with a rifle like mine?" she asked. Henrik's laugh was gentle but dismissive. "I don't think anyone's ever tried. I mean, why would you? It would be like entering a Formula One race with a Honda Civic. Technically possible, but you're setting yourself up for embarrassment." That evening, Juliette sat in her small rented room in Chamonix, staring at her rifle propped against the wall. The Academy's library had extensive ballistics resources, and she'd spent hours researching the theoretical possibilities of her setup. The mathematics were encouraging her rifle, with the right ammunition and perfect conditions, could theoretically deliver effective accuracy at extreme ranges. But theory and practice were different things, especially when everyone around you expected failure. She opened her laptop and began researching everything she could find about extreme long-range shooting. If her classmates thought her rifle was a liability, she'd have to prove that the shooter mattered more than the price tag. The 2,500-meter challenge wasn't just an academic exercise. It was a chance to prove that determination and skill could overcome assumptions about money and equipment. She had no idea that in 3 weeks she'd get that chance sooner than expected. The Alpine Precision Academy's weekly advanced seminars were invitation-only affairs where the most promising students received specialized training in exotic shooting scenarios. Juliette learned about them the same way she learned about most exclusive opportunities at the academy, by overhearing conversations she wasn't meant to be part of. "The ballistics laboratory session is incredible," Henrik told Marco as they cleaned their rifles after morning practice. "Weber brings out the military-grade chronographs and lets you test different ammunition loads. Really helps you understand what your rifle is capable of." "I heard they're planning a visit to the Swarovski optics facility next month," Marco replied. "Direct access to their engineering team. My father's connections got me on the list." Juliette continued cleaning her rifle methodically, pretending not to listen. The pattern had become familiar over her 6 weeks at the academy. Advanced opportunities were distributed through informal networks conversations at expensive dinners she couldn't afford. Connections made during weekend trips to exclusive shooting competitions. Invitations extended to students whose equipment and background suggested they belonged in elite circles. When she'd asked Weber directly about joining the advanced ballistics seminar, his response had been diplomatically discouraging. "Mademoiselle Moreau, these sessions are designed for students with equipment capable of taking advantage of advanced techniques. Perhaps focus on mastering fundamentals first." The implication stung because her fundamentals were solid. In daily range exercises, her scores consistently ranked in the top third of the class. Her shooting journals were meticulous, tracking every variable from wind conditions to ammunition temperature. She'd even started hand-loading her own cartridges in the academy's reloading facility during off hours, experimenting with powder charges and bullet weights to optimize her rifle's performance. But excellence within limitations wasn't the same as excellence without them. The weekend competition at the Geneva Shooting Club exemplified the divide. Henrik had casually mentioned it during the break, assuming Juliette wouldn't be interested. "It's mostly a social event," he'd said. "Wealthy collectors showing off their toys. The shooting is almost secondary." Juliette discovered later that 4 academy students had attended, forming unofficial study groups afterward to discuss advanced techniques they'd observed. She learned about their trip through overheard conversations about precision ammunition. That cost more per round than she spent on groceries in a week. The exclusion wasn't malicious, it was systemic. The academy operated on the assumption that serious precision shooting required serious financial investment. Students with expensive equipment were presumed to be serious about their training and worthy of advanced instruction. Students with budget equipment were presumed to be hobbyists, temporarily occupying space until they realized they belonged elsewhere. Weber reinforced these assumptions during a lecture on equipment selection. "Investment in quality gear demonstrates commitment," he explained to the assembled class. "When I see a student arrive with premium equipment, I know they're serious about achieving mastery. Conversely, when students attempt to minimize equipment costs, it often indicates they view this training as experimental rather than foundational." The message was clear. Juliette's rifle wasn't just inadequate equipment. It was evidence of inadequate commitment. The breaking point came during the academy's monthly skills assessment. Students were required to engage targets at progressively longer ranges, with their scores determining eligibility for advanced coursework. Juliette had prepared extensively, studying wind patterns and atmospheric conditions, hand-loading specialized ammunition, even practicing breathing techniques borrowed from Olympic shooters. The assessment began at 600 meters. progressed to 800, then 1,000. Juliette's performance was steady, not spectacular, but consistently in the upper tier of results. As ranges extended, some students struggled with equipment limitations. Henrik's custom rifle performed flawlessly, while Marco dealt with tracking issues in his premium scope. At 1,200 meters, Juliette faced the most challenging shots of her academy career. The target appeared as a small black dot through her scope, dancing slightly in the heat mirage that rose from the sunlit valley below. She calculated wind drift, atmospheric pressure, and temperature variations with the same methodical precision. She applied to everything else. Her first shot missed left by 6 inches. The second caught the edge of the scoring ring. Her third found the center of the target. Weber recorded her score without comment, but she noticed his slight frown. Success at 1,200 meters with her equipment wasn't supposed to happen. It contradicted the narrative that budget rifles were fundamentally limited at extreme ranges. After the assessment, she overheard Weber speaking quietly with Dr. Schneider, the Academy's chief ballistics instructor. The Moreau girl is performing beyond her equipment's theoretical capabilities. Either she's gotten extremely lucky, or there are variables we're not accounting for. Budget rifles can occasionally produce good results, Dr. Schneider replied. But consistency at extreme ranges requires precision that mass-produced equipment simply cannot deliver. Give her a few more sessions at 1,200 meters, and the limitations will become apparent. Their dismissal of her performance as statistical anomaly rather than skill was almost worse than outright criticism. She wasn't just failing to meet their expectations, she was succeeding in ways that challenged their fundamental assumptions about the relationship between equipment cost and shooting capability. That evening, Juliette sat in the Academy's library, surrounded by ballistics texts and performance data. She documented every shot she'd fired over 6 weeks, tracking not just point of impact but atmospheric conditions, ammunition performance, and equipment behavior. The data told a story that contradicted the assumptions about her rifle's limitations. Equipment wasn't perfect, but it was more capable than anyone believed. More importantly, she was more capable than anyone believed. The pattern of exclusion wasn't based on her actual performance. It was based on preconceptions about what performance was possible with budget equipment. She closed her notebook and looked out at the Alps glowing in the evening light. Tomorrow would bring another round of subtle exclusions and diplomatic dismissals. But her data suggested something that neither her instructors nor her classmates understood. Her rifle's limitations were theoretical, while her skills were becoming very real. The question was whether she'd ever get the opportunity to prove it. While her classmates socialized at expensive restaurants in Chamonix or traveled to weekend competitions, Juliette spent her evenings in the Academy's technical library, a climate-controlled room filled with ballistics texts, military manuals, and decades of precision shooting research. The librarian, an elderly Swiss woman named Mrs. Zimmermann, had grown accustomed to finding her there long after other students had left. "Another late night, Miss Moreau?" Mrs. Zimmermann would ask, her tone carrying maternal concern. "Research," Juliette would reply simply, surrounded by stacks of technical papers and her ever-present notebook. What she didn't mention was the scope of her research. While her classmates focused on equipment upgrades and social networking, Juliette was building a comprehensive understanding of extreme, long-range ballistics that would have impressed doctoral candidates in physics. She studied atmospheric density calculations, Coriolis effect tables, and wind deflection formulas with the intensity of someone preparing for oral examinations. Her notebook had evolved into a technical manual customized for her specific rifle and local conditions. She documented wind patterns for every range at the Academy, noting how mountain thermals affected bullet trajectory at different times of day. She'd calculated ballistic coefficients for dozens of ammunition types, identifying which loads performed best in her rifle despite costing a fraction of premium match ammunition. The Academy's reloading facility became her second laboratory. Using precision scales and chronographs typically reserved for advanced students, she developed custom ammunition loads that maximized her rifle's accuracy. Her logbook recorded thousands of data points, powder charges measured to the tenth of a grain, bullet seating depths adjusted in thousandths of an inch, primer types tested for consistency. "You're here again?" asked Stefan, the Academy's chief equipment technician, finding her at the reloading bench for the fourth consecutive evening. "Don't you have a social life?" Juliette looked up from the cartridge she was carefully assembling. "This is my social life." Stefan examined her work rows of precisely loaded cartridges, each labeled with specific load data and expected performance characteristics. The attention to detail was remarkable, especially for someone working with budget components. "Your precision is better than most of our advanced students," he admitted. "Why not invest in premium equipment if you're this serious?" "Because I want to understand what's possible with what I have," Juliette replied. "Premium equipment might perform better, but it won't teach me why it performs better." This philosophy extended to every aspect of her training. While other students relied on ballistic calculators and smartphone apps, Juliette calculated corrections, manually understanding the physics behind every adjustment. She practiced mental math for wind deflection until she could compute corrections faster than most students could input data into their electronic aids. Her physical training was equally methodical. The Academy's gym was nearly empty at 0500 hours. When she arrived for daily workouts focused not on general fitness but on shooting-specific conditioning. She practiced breathing exercises that would slow her heart rate under stress, developed muscle memory for shooting positions that could be maintained for extended periods, and built the core strength necessary for stability during long shooting sessions. The most valuable part of her preparation happened in locations her classmates never visited. The Academy maintained several remote practice ranges accessible only by hiking trails through the Alps, while others used the convenient main facilities. Juliette explored these isolated ranges, learning to shoot in conditions that tested both equipment and skill. At the 1,500-meter remote range, accessible only by a 2-hour mountain hike, she discovered what her rifle was truly capable of. Away from observers and time constraints, she could experiment with techniques that formal instruction didn't cover. She learned to read wind patterns by watching grass movement and thermal currents, to judge distance by terrain features, to maintain focus during the long wait between shot and impact at extreme ranges. Her shooting diary from these solo sessions told a story that would have surprised her instructors. At 1,000 meters, her rifle consistently delivered sub-OA accuracy with properly loaded ammunition. At 1,200 meters, she could maintain accuracy within acceptable limits for precision shooting. At 1,500 meters, a range her classmates hadn't yet attempted, she'd made successful hits with carefully calculated corrections. The data contradicted everything she'd been told about her equipment's limitations. More importantly, these sessions taught her something no amount of formal instruction could provide: confidence in her own judgment. When Weber or other instructors made dismissive comments about budget equipment, she knew from direct experience that their assumptions were incomplete. Her rifle wasn't perfect, but it was far more capable than anyone believed. She documented everything meticulously, not just for her own reference, but because she sensed that someday she might need to prove her capabilities with objective data. Her preparation journals included atmospheric readings, wind measurements, ammunition performance data, and detailed analysis of every variable that affected long-range accuracy. The work was solitary and demanding, requiring her to develop expertise in areas most shooters considered beyond their scope. She taught herself meteorology to better understand atmospheric effects on bullet trajectory. She studied material science to understand how temperature affected her rifle's barrel harmonics. She learned optics theory to maximize her scope's performance despite its modest specifications. By her 8th week at the academy, Juliette possessed knowledge and skills that extended far beyond what formal instruction had provided. She understood her equipment's capabilities better than anyone else understood theirs. She could calculate ballistic corrections manually under field conditions. She had developed ammunition loads specifically optimized for her rifle's characteristics. Most importantly, she had proven to herself that her equipment's limitations were far less restrictive than everyone assumed. What she needed now was an opportunity to prove it to others. Late one evening, as she packed her gear after another session at the remote range, Juliette paused to watch the sun set over the Alps. The mathematical beauty of ballistics suddenly seemed connected to the natural beauty of the mountains, both systems governed by physical laws that rewarded understanding and precision. Tomorrow would bring another day of subtle dismissals and diplomatic discouragement. But tonight, she knew something that her critics didn't. She was ready for challenges they couldn't imagine. The question was whether those challenges would ever come. The Academy's monthly progress review took place in Weber's office, a Spartanly decorated room that reflected his military background. Juliette sat across from his desk, her training portfolio open between them, while Weber reviewed her performance data with characteristic thoroughness. "Your marksmanship scores are satisfactory," Weber began, his tone professional but measured. "Your theoretical knowledge exceeds expectations for a student at your experience level. However, there are concerns about your training focus." Juliette kept her expression neutral. "What kind of concerns, sir?" Weber gestured toward her extensive notes and documentation. "You've been spending considerable time on advanced ballistics research and specialized ammunition development. These activities, while admirable in their thoroughness, may be diverting attention from fundamental skill development." "I believe understanding ballistics improves my fundamental skills, sir." "To a point, yes. But there's a difference between useful knowledge and theoretical excess." Weber leaned back in his chair, studying her with the measured gaze of someone making a difficult assessment. "Your equipment imposes certain practical limitations that advanced theory cannot overcome. Focusing on areas where your rifle cannot deliver may create unrealistic expectations." The comment stung because it dismissed months of careful research and preparation. "Sir, my range performance suggests that my rifle is more capable than initially assumed." Weber's eyebrow raised slightly. "At what ranges?" "I've achieved consistent accuracy at 1,200 meters during formal assessments, and my solo practice sessions suggest capability beyond that." "Solo practice sessions?" Weber's tone sharpened. "Where are you conducting unauthorized training?" Juliette realized she'd revealed more than intended. "The remote ranges accessible by the mountain trails, sir. I've been using them for additional practice." Weber's expression darkened. "Those ranges are not approved for unsupervised use by intermediate students. They lack safety oversight and emergency communications." "You've been training alone in alpine conditions?" "Yes, sir. I've been careful too." "Careful is not sufficient. Those ranges exist for advanced students conducting research under proper supervision. Intermediate students using them independently represents an unacceptable safety risk." The conversation was spiraling away from her performance toward disciplinary concerns. Weber pulled out a form and began making notes. "Effective immediately. You're restricted to supervised ranges only. No more unauthorized solo training." "Sir, those sessions have been crucial for my development." "The remote ranges offer training conditions that exceed your current skill level and equipment capabilities," Weber interrupted. "This is exactly what I'm referring to. You're attempting advanced techniques before mastering fundamentals. Using inadequate equipment in conditions that require precision your rifle cannot reliably deliver." Juliette felt frustration building but kept her voice controlled. "My documentation shows consistent performance improvements. The remote range sessions have provided data that Data collected under unsupervised conditions without proper verification. Mademoiselle Moreau, precision shooting requires objective standards, not self-reported achievements. Weber's tone carried the finality of someone who had made a decision. Your enthusiasm for the sport is commendable, but it must be channeled productively. He opened another file containing what appeared to be curriculum guidelines. I'm recommending that you repeat the intermediate course before advancing to long-range training. This will provide additional time to develop fundamental skills with equipment appropriate to your experience level. The recommendation hit like a physical blow. Repeating the intermediate course meant falling behind her current classmates, missing the advanced training that led to elite precision shooting opportunities. It meant being officially categorized as someone who couldn't keep pace with proper students. Sir, my performance scores don't suggest I need remedial training. Your scores suggest adequate performance within a limited envelope. Advanced training requires students capable of growth beyond current limitations. Your equipment imposes constraints that make such growth unlikely. Weber's assessment was delivered with the clinical precision of a medical diagnosis. He wasn't being cruel, he was being realistic about what he considered her ceiling. In his experience, students with budget equipment hit performance walls that could only be overcome through substantial equipment upgrades. Have you considered that your time at the academy might be better spent developing skills more suited to your equipment's capabilities? Weber asked. Hunting applications, recreational target shooting, perhaps competitive shooting in divisions that don't require extreme precision. The suggestion that she should lower her ambitions to match her equipment felt like defeat disguised as practical advice. Weber was essentially telling her that precision shooting at the highest levels wasn't for people like her, people who couldn't afford to buy their way past equipment limitations. Sir, I believe my equipment is more capable than current assessments suggest. Given the opportunity to demonstrate, Mademoiselle Moreau, Weber interrupted with gentle finality. Professional precision shooting requires more than belief. It requires equipment capable of delivering consistent performance under demanding conditions. Your rifle, while adequate for many applications, is not designed for the extreme precision we teach in advanced courses. He handed her a revised training schedule that showed her reassigned to intermediate classes. Focus on maximizing performance within realistic parameters. Not every student is destined for extreme long-range work, and there's no shame in recognizing practical limitations. As Juliette left Weber's office, the weight of official dismissal settled over her like a heavy coat. She wasn't being removed from the academy, but she was being relegated to a lower tier of training based not on her performance, but on assumptions about her equipment's capabilities. The most frustrating part was that Weber's decision was logical within the academy's framework. Students with expensive equipment were presumed capable of advanced performance and given opportunities to prove it. Students with budget equipment were presumed limited and channeled toward realistic applications. She walked across the academy grounds toward her quarters, passing groups of advanced students preparing for long-range exercises she would no longer be eligible to join. Her months of preparation, her careful research, her documented improvements, all dismissed because they had been achieved with inadequate tools. But as she reached her room and saw her rifle case propped against the wall, Juliette felt something sharpen inside her. Weber's assessment was based on theoretical limitations and institutional assumptions. Her preparation was based on actual performance and documented capability. The question was no longer whether she could prove her critics wrong. The question was whether she would ever get the chance to try. The reassignment to intermediate training created a social earthquake that Juliette felt in every interaction. Her former classmates, now officially ahead of her in the academy's hierarchy, treated her with the awkward politeness reserved for someone who had fallen behind. Conversations that once included her naturally now stopped when she approached. replaced by sympathetic smiles that hurt worse than outright dismissal. "It's probably for the best," Henrik said during one particularly uncomfortable encounter in the equipment storage area. "Better to master the fundamentals thoroughly than to struggle with advanced material." His tone carried the practiced kindness of someone delivering difficult news, as if her reassignment was a medical condition requiring delicate handling. The intermediate classes felt like academic prison. Juliette found herself surrounded by new students learning basic concepts she had mastered months ago, reviewing safety procedures she could recite in her sleep, practicing 200-meter shots that felt elementary after her secret sessions at extreme ranges. The instructor, Sergeant Mueller, was competent but clearly accustomed to teaching beginners who needed encouragement rather than challenge. "Excellent group, Miss Moreau," Mueller said after Juliette placed 5 shots within a 2-inch circle at 400 meters. The praise felt patronizing. She knew she was capable of similar precision at 3 times that distance. But such knowledge was now considered irrelevant. The worst part was watching her former classmates advance into training she had been deemed unworthy to continue. Through overheard conversations and glimpses of their range exercises, she learned about advanced techniques that matched the theoretical knowledge she had developed through independent study. They were learning to engage targets beyond 1,500 meters, studying atmospheric effects she had already mastered, developing skills that her preparation had prepared her for better than their expensive equipment. Dr. Schneider's advanced ballistics seminar was particularly painful to observe from a distance. Through the laboratory windows, she could see Henrik and Marco working with precision chronographs and ballistic measuring equipment, conducting experiments that her budget constraints had forced her to improvise in makeshift conditions. The irony was bitter. She probably understood the underlying physics better than most participants, but her equipment had disqualified her from official recognition of that knowledge. The isolation extended beyond academic exclusion. Social gatherings that had never quite included her now definitively excluded her. Dinner invitations to expensive restaurants dried up completely, replaced by polite acknowledgments when she passed groups of advanced students discussing weekend plans she wouldn't be part of. Her scholarship status, once merely a source of financial pressure, became a social marker that defined her place in the academy's informal hierarchy. She was the student who had tried to exceed her station and been gently but firmly redirected to her appropriate level. "I heard Weber was actually quite kind about it," she overheard Marco telling another student. "He could have simply dismissed her from the program, but he gave her a chance to succeed at a more realistic level. Not everyone is cut out for elite precision shooting." The comment crystallized something that had been building for weeks. Her reassignment wasn't viewed as a temporary setback or an opportunity for additional preparation. It was seen as a final verdict on her capabilities. She had been sorted into a category of students who belonged at lower levels of performance, and that categorization was now considered permanent. Evening visits to the technical library became exercises in avoiding her former classmates. Advanced students had access to specialized materials she was no longer authorized to use, creating invisible barriers in a space that had once been her refuge. Mrs. Zimmerman, the librarian, seemed to understand the situation without explanation. "Perhaps you might find the recreational shooting journals interesting," she suggested gently, directing Juliette toward publications that focused on hunting and casual target shooting rather than precision competition. Even her relationship with Stefan, the equipment technician, changed. Their conversations about ammunition development and ballistics optimization became stilted, as if such topics were no longer appropriate for her current status. He still allowed her to use the reloading facility, but his tone suggested he considered her continued research more hobby than serious preparation. The Academy's monthly newsletter featured a photograph of advanced students at a precision shooting competition in Switzerland, their custom rifles gleaming in professional photography. Juliette recognized faces that had once been peer group colleagues. now definitively established as belonging to an elite she would never join. Her own training sessions became solitary affairs conducted under the constant weight of reduced expectations. When she performed well in intermediate classes, it was considered adequate for her level. When she struggled, it confirmed the wisdom of her reassignment. There was no path back to advanced training, no mechanism for demonstrating that her preparation had exceeded her official categorization. The most painful moments came during brief encounters with Weber himself. His interactions with her were professional but distant, carrying the tone of someone who had made a difficult but necessary decision and preferred not to revisit it. He would nod politely when their paths crossed, but the intensive mentorship she had once hoped for had been replaced by bureaucratic courtesy. Sleep became difficult in her small room in Chamonix. She would lie awake calculating ballistic solutions for shots she would never be authorized to attempt, reviewing atmospheric data that was no longer considered relevant to her training, planning ammunition loads for applications that exceeded her official capabilities. Her rifle case seemed to mock her from its position against the wall, evidence of the limitations that had defined her trajectory at the academy. The months of careful preparation, the technical knowledge she had developed, the documented performance improvements that no one considered significant enough to override institutional assumptions about budget equipment. But in quiet moments, when frustration gave way to cold analysis, Juliette began to understand that her isolation might also be her opportunity. With no official expectations to meet and no advanced curriculum to follow, she had freedom to pursue preparation that exceeded anything the Academy's structured program provided. The question was whether preparation without opportunity would ever matter. 3 weeks later, she would discover that sometimes opportunity arrived when least expected, in forms that no institutional framework could anticipate or control. The emergency call came through the Academy's communication system at 13:47, hours on a Tuesday afternoon that had begun like any other. Juliette was in the intermediate classroom reviewing basic wind deflection calculations she could perform in her sleep when the urgent tone of the public address system cut through the routine lesson. All personnel, attention. We have received an emergency request from Swiss Alpine Rescue. Missing climber situation in the Matterhorn region requires immediate precision shooting assistance. Advanced students and instructors report to the main briefing hall immediately. Sergeant Mueller paused mid-sentence, his explanation of simple ballistic coefficients forgotten as the gravity of a real-world emergency settled over the room. Intermediate students remain in class, he announced. This is not a training exercise. But Juliette was already gathering her materials, drawn by the same instinct that had compelled her months of preparation. Through the classroom windows, she could see advanced students hurrying toward the briefing hall, their faces carrying the focused urgency of people transitioning from academic exercise to life-and-death reality. She slipped out of the classroom during the confusion and made her way to the briefing hall, staying near the back where she could observe without being noticed. The scene inside was controlled chaos as Weber coordinated with Swiss authorities via video conference. The situation is this, Weber announced to the assembled advanced students and instructors. A climber fell yesterday during a solo ascent of the Matterhorn's north face. He's trapped on a ledge approximately 600 meters below the summit, injured but alive. Weather conditions prevent helicopter rescue, and climbing approaches are impossible due to recent avalanche activity. A detailed topographical map appeared on the main display, showing the Matterhorn's imposing pyramid shape, marked with elevation lines and hazard indicators. Weber pointed to a small red dot on the mountain's face. The climber's location has been confirmed by drone surveillance, but his position makes conventional rescue impossible. However, there's a potential solution. Weber's tone shifted to something approaching excitement. Swiss authorities have identified a shooting position on the adjacent Dent terrains that could provide a clear line of sight to the climbers. Location. Murmurs rippled through the assembled students. Henrik raised his hand. Sir, what kind of shot are we discussing? Weber consulted his notes. Range is 2,487 meters. Approximately 2.5 miles. The number hit the room like a physical force. Even for the Academy's most advanced students, a 2.5-mile shot represented the extreme edge of theoretical possibility. Juliette felt her pulse quicken as she recognized the distance. She had studied shots at precisely this range during her unauthorized research. The plan, Weber continued, involves delivering a rescue line to the climber's position using a specialized projectile. The shot must be accurate enough to place the line within his reach, but the tolerance for error is minimal. The ledge he's trapped on is approximately 3 meters wide. Dr. Schneider stepped forward with additional technical details. Atmospheric. Conditions are challenging but manageable. Elevation differential creates significant ballistic complications. We'll need to account for decreased air density, temperature variations, and complex wind patterns created by the mountain's topography. Weber began calling names for the rescue team. Henrik, your Accuracy International has the proven precision for this kind of work. Marco, your custom ammunition loads will be essential. Dr. Schneider will handle ballistic calculations. Stefan will prepare specialized equipment. As the team assembled, Juliette noticed something that made her stomach clench with familiar frustration. The selected students were being chosen based on their equipment rather than their demonstrated skills. Henrik's expensive rifle was assumed capable of the shot because of its price tag, not because he had proven accuracy at extreme ranges. Sir, Henrik said, his voice carrying uncertainty that surprised everyone, I've never attempted a shot beyond 1,800 meters. At 2,487 meters, the projectile flight time will be over 4 seconds. The wind deflection calculations will be handled by Dr. Schneider, Weber replied firmly. Your job is to execute the shot based on his calculations. But Juliette could see the doubt in Henrik's eyes, and she understood why. At 2.5 miles, shooting became more physics than marksmanship. Success required not just expensive equipment, but intimate understanding of ballistic principles, atmospheric effects, and long-range precision techniques that couldn't be purchased or abbreviated through brief instruction. Marco seemed equally uncertain. Sir, what about backup options? If the first shot misses, do we get additional attempts? Weber's expression was grim. Weather windows are limited. We may get 1 shot, possibly 2 if conditions hold. The climber's hypothermia risk increases with every hour of delay. As the briefing continued with technical details and equipment preparation, Juliette felt a growing sense of urgency that had nothing to do with the climber's predicament. She had spent months preparing for exactly this type of shot, studying the ballistics, developing the skills, understanding the variables that would determine success or failure at extreme range. Her unauthorized research had focused specifically on shots beyond 2,000 meters because she knew that such distances represented the ultimate test of both equipment and shooter capability. She had calculated atmospheric effects for mountain shooting, developed ammunition loads optimized for extreme range accuracy, and practiced the mental disciplines required for shots where success depended on perfect execution of theoretical knowledge. But she was trapped in the intermediate program, her capabilities dismissed because of equipment prejudices and institutional assumptions. As the advanced team prepared for a mission that could determine whether a man lived or died, she was expected to return to classroom exercises that insulted her actual skill level. The irony was brutal. The Academy's most prepared student for this specific challenge was the one person they would never consider qualified to attempt it. As the briefing concluded and teams hurried toward equipment preparation, Juliette remained in the back of the hall, watching her former classmates accept a responsibility she was better prepared to handle than any of them. The climber's life would depend on their success with techniques she had mastered and equipment capabilities they had never properly tested. She turned and walked slowly back toward the intermediate classroom, knowing that while others prepared for the most important shot in the Academy's history, she would be reviewing ballistic coefficients she could calculate without conscious thought. But as she reached the classroom door, Juliette paused. The climber's life hung in the balance, and institutional protocol was about to prevent the most qualified person from helping save him. Sometimes, she realized, being right mattered more than being authorized. Juliette didn't return to the intermediate classroom. Instead, she walked directly to her quarters, her mind racing through calculations that had become as natural as breathing. The numbers Weber had provided: 2,487 meters, mountain conditions, 3-meter target tolerance painted a picture she understood better than anyone else at the Academy. She pulled out her preparation notebooks, thick volumes filled with months of research that suddenly had life or death relevance. Page after page of atmospheric calculations, wind deflection tables, and ballistic coefficients for extreme range shooting. She had studied scenarios identical to the Matterhorn rescue, not as academic exercises, but as practical problems requiring real solutions. The specialized ammunition she had, developed through countless hours at the reloading bench, was optimized for exactly these conditions. Her custom loads used temperature-stable powder that would perform consistently in alpine conditions, matched with bullets selected for their ballistic coefficient and stability at extreme range. Each cartridge represented hours of research and testing that the advanced students would now have to improvise under emergency conditions. More importantly, her understanding of the shot's requirements extended beyond simple ballistics. She had studied the psychological demands of extreme range shooting, the mental disciplines required to maintain focus during the extended time between trigger press and impact. At 2,487 meters, the projectile would take over 4 seconds to reach the target, an eternity in precision shooting where doubt and overthinking could destroy accuracy. Her unauthorized training at the Academy's remote ranges had prepared her for exactly this scenario. Those solitary sessions in alpine conditions had taught her to read mountain wind patterns, to judge atmospheric density by feel, to maintain concentration during the long mechanical process of extreme range shot execution. As she reviewed her data, Juliette realized something that chilled her. The advanced team was about to attempt a shot they weren't properly prepared for. Henrik's uncertainty during the briefing hadn't been modesty. It had been honest recognition that he lacked experience at ranges where equipment alone couldn't guarantee success. Marco's concern about backup shots revealed that neither student understood the precision required for success on the first attempt. Dr. Schneider would provide ballistic calculations, but calculations were only as good as the data they were based on. Extreme range shooting required understanding variables that couldn't be measured from a briefing. Room atmospheric conditions that changed by the minute, wind patterns that varied with altitude, equipment behavior under stress that could only be learned through extensive practice. The rescue team was being assembled based on institutional assumptions rather than actual capability. Henrik's expensive rifle was presumed adequate because of its price, but Juliette knew from her research that equipment cost had diminishing returns at extreme ranges. Success depended more on shooter preparation, ammunition optimization, and understanding of conditions than on whether the rifle cost 10,000 or 50,000 euros. She opened her ammunition storage case and examined the custom loads she had developed for extreme range work. Each cartridge was hand-loaded with components selected for consistency and performance in demanding conditions. The powder charges were measured to the tenth of a grain. The bullets were sorted by weight and balanced for uniformity. The cases were prepared with the precision of laboratory equipment. Her rifle, the cheap junk that had been dismissed as inadequate for advanced training, was also ready in ways that expensive equipment often wasn't. She had tested every component under stress, documented its performance across thousands of rounds, developed intimate familiarity with its characteristics that money couldn't purchase. She knew exactly how it would behave under the conditions they would face on the Matterhorn. The crisis presented a terrible irony. The Academy's most qualified person for the rescue shot was the one person they would never consider asking. Institutional prejudice was about to prevent the best prepared shooter from attempting to save a man's life. Through her window, she could see the advance team loading equipment into vehicles for transport to the shooting position. Their movements carried urgency but also uncertainty. They were preparing for a challenge that exceeded their documented experience. Henrik had never made a successful shot beyond 1,800 meters, yet he was being asked to deliver precision at nearly 2,500 meters. With a man's life hanging in the balance, Juliette closed her notebooks and began organizing her gear with methodical precision. Her rifle case, her custom ammunition, her weather monitoring equipment, her range estimation tools, everything she had assembled through months of careful preparation. The Academy might not consider her qualified for the mission, but her own data suggested otherwise. She thought about the climber trapped on the Matterhorn's face, slowly succumbing to hypothermia while rescue teams debated approaches and calculated risks. His survival depended on someone making an impossible shot under extreme conditions, exactly the challenge she had been preparing for since arriving at the Academy. The institutional barriers were clear. Weber would never authorize her participation. Her reassignment to intermediate training had definitively established her status as unqualified for advanced operations. Her equipment had been judged inadequate, her skills deemed insufficient, her preparation dismissed as enthusiastic but irrelevant. But institutional barriers were human constructs, while ballistics were physical laws that didn't care about social hierarchies or equipment prejudices. The shot required specific skills and knowledge that she possessed in greater depth than anyone else at the Academy. The climber's life depended on successful execution of techniques she had mastered through months of dedicated preparation. As she watched the rescue team's vehicles disappear toward the mountains, Juliette faced a decision that would define not just her future at the Academy, but her understanding of her own capabilities. She could accept the limitations others had placed on her, or she could prove that preparation and skill mattered more than institutional approval and expensive equipment. The climber on the Matterhorn was running out of time. The rescue team was heading toward a challenge they weren't properly prepared for, and the person most qualified to help was sitting in a small room in Chamonix, watching opportunity slip away because others had decided she didn't belong. Juliette stood up and began loading her rifle case with deliberate precision. Sometimes proving yourself required permission. Sometimes it required forgiveness. And sometimes it required neither. Juliette's decision crystallized as she watched the rescue team's convoy disappear into the alpine roads, leading toward the Matterhorn. She grabbed her gear and rushed toward the Academy's main building, knowing she had minutes before the team would be beyond communication range and committed to their approach. She found Weber in the command center, coordinating with Swiss authorities via radio while monitoring weather updates from the rescue site. The room buzzed with controlled urgency as instructors tracked the team's progress and refined ballistic calculations based on real-time atmospheric data. "Sir," Juliette said, approaching Weber with her rifle case in hand, "I request permission to join the rescue team." Weber turned, his expression shifting from focused concentration to surprise, then to something approaching irritation. "Mademoiselle Moreau, you're supposed to be in intermediate training. This operation is restricted to advanced personnel." "Sir, I have extensive preparation for exactly this type of shot. My research covers atmospheric effects at extreme ranges, and I've developed ammunition specifically optimized for alpine conditions." Dr. Schneider looked up from his ballistic calculator, his eyebrows raised in disbelief. "You've developed ammunition for 2,500-meter shots? With what equipment?" Custom loads using temperature-stable powder and high ballistic coefficient projectiles. I've tested them at ranges up to 1,800 meters with consistent results that extrapolate reliably to longer distances. Weber's expression hardened. You've been conducting unauthorized testing beyond approved ranges? We discussed this during your performance review. The conversation was already spiraling toward disciplinary concerns rather than mission effectiveness. Juliette tried to refocus on the rescue requirements. Sir, the shot parameters match scenarios I've studied extensively. Range, atmospheric conditions, target requirements. I have documented preparation for exactly these variables. Documented preparation with inadequate equipment, Weber replied sharply. The rescue shot requires precision that your rifle simply cannot deliver. This is not a training exercise where approximate accuracy is acceptable. Stefan, monitoring communications from the rescue site, interjected with an update that made the conversation more urgent. Team reports weather window is narrowing. Visibility is decreasing and wind conditions are becoming unstable. Weber keyed his radio. Henrik, report your current status. Henrik's voice crackled through the static, carrying tension that was audible, even through poor radio quality. Sir, we're establishing the shooting position now, but conditions are more challenging than anticipated. Wind is gusting unpredictably, and atmospheric density seems inconsistent with our calculations. Dr. Schneider frowned at his instruments. The mountain topography is creating microclimates that weren't accounted for in our initial planning. We may need to recalculate ballistic solutions on site. Juliette stepped forward, her voice urgent but controlled. Sir, I've studied mountain atmospheric effects extensively. The temperature inversions and wind patterns around the Matterhorn create specific ballistic challenges that require compensation techniques I've researched and practiced. Researched and practiced where? Weber demanded. You've never been authorized. For training beyond 1,200 meters. At the remote ranges, sir. I've documented atmospheric readings and ballistic performance under varying alpine conditions. My data shows. Your data shows unauthorized training that violated safety protocols, Weber interrupted. This is exactly why you were reassigned to intermediate training. You've been conducting unsupervised experiments that exceed your qualification level. The radio crackled again. Sir, this is Henrik. I'm having difficulty with the wind calculations. The conditions are more complex than our training covered. Dr. Schneider's ballistic solution isn't matching what I'm observing through the scope. Weber's jaw tightened as he realized the team was encountering exactly the challenges that extreme range shooting presented. Henrik, follow the calculated solution. Your observations may be affected by scope mirage or atmospheric distortion. Sir, Juliette interjected, alpine conditions create wind patterns that can't be calculated remotely. The shooter needs to read local conditions and adjust accordingly. I've developed techniques for exactly these situations. Dr. Schneider looked up from his instruments with growing concern. The atmospheric readings from the site don't match our laboratory calculations. The team may need to adjust ballistic solutions based on observed conditions rather than theoretical models. Weber faced a decision that was becoming increasingly urgent. The rescue team was encountering difficulties that had been anticipated in Juliette's unauthorized research, but not in the Academy's formal curriculum. Her preparation appeared directly relevant to the mission's success, but accepting her assistance would validate training methods he had specifically prohibited. Sir, Stefan called from the communications station. We're receiving an emergency update from the climber's position. His condition is deteriorating rapidly. Hypothermia is becoming critical. The time pressure was mounting, but Weber's response remained consistent with institutional protocol. Mademoiselle Moreau, your enthusiasm is noted, but this mission requires proven capabilities with reliable equipment. Your rifle is simply not qualified for precision shooting at 2,487 meters. Sir, Precision shooting at extreme ranges depends more on shooter preparation and ammunition optimization than on equipment cost. My rifle has demonstrated sub-OA accuracy with proper loads. Sub-OA accuracy at what ranges? Dr. Schneider asked skeptically. Up to 1,800 meters in field conditions, sir. Ballistic modeling suggests equivalent performance at longer ranges with proper atmospheric compensation. Weber's expression suggested he considered her claim somewhere between optimistic and delusional. Ballistic modeling is not the same as proven performance. The rescue shot requires absolute reliability, not theoretical projections. The radio interrupted with another transmission from Henrik, his voice now carrying obvious stress. Sir, I'm not confident in the shot solution. The wind is doing things that don't match our calculations, and the atmospheric effects are beyond my experience level. Weber keyed the radio immediately. Henrik, trust your training and execute based on Dr. Schneider's calculations. You have the best equipment available. Equipment doesn't compensate for inexperience, Juliette said quietly. Weber turned to face her directly, his expression carrying the finality of institutional authority. Mademoiselle Moreau, you are not qualified for this mission. Your equipment is inadequate, your training is incomplete, and your unauthorized research represents dangerous overconfidence. Return to your scheduled classes immediately. As Weber turned back to coordinate with the rescue team, Juliette understood that official channels had closed permanently. Her months of preparation, her documented research, her understanding of the specific challenges the team was facing, none of it mattered because institutional prejudice had predetermined her inadequacy. But as she listened to Henrik's increasingly uncertain radio transmissions and Dr. Schneider's growing concern about atmospheric complications, she also understood something else. The mission was heading toward failure based on the same assumptions that had limited her opportunities. Clymer's life hung in the balance, and the people authorized to save him weren't prepared for the challenge they faced. Juliette left the command center with her gear, but instead of returning to the intermediate classroom, she walked directly to the academy's vehicle depot. The rescue team had taken the primary transport, but emergency protocols required backup. Vehicles to remain available for support operations. She signed out a Land Rover using her student authorization, listing emergency equipment transport as the mission purpose. The depot supervisor, focused on multiple emergency communications, barely glanced at the paperwork before handing her the keys. As she loaded her rifle case and gear into the vehicle, Juliette's mind worked through the logistics of what she was about to attempt. The rescue team had a 40-minute head start toward the Matterhorn, but their route involved establishing a complex shooting position on the Dent terrains. If she moved quickly and took the more direct approach she had studied during her map research, she might reach an alternative shooting position before they were ready to attempt their shot. The drive through the Alpine roads gave her time to review everything she knew about the rescue scenario. The climber's position on the Matterhorn's north face was accessible from multiple shooting angles, but the academy team had chosen the Dent terrains position based on institutional preference for established protocols rather than optimal ballistics. Her own research suggested a superior position on the Hernley Ridge, APPROX, IMATEL, 300 meters closer to the target and offering more stable atmospheric conditions. The approach was more technically demanding and required hiking through unmarked terrain, but it would reduce the shot distance to 2,187 meters. Still extreme, but within the proven capabilities of her equipment and ammunition. As she drove deeper into the mountains, radio chatter from the rescue operation provided updates that confirmed her concerns about the academy team's preparation. Henrik's transmission showed increasing uncertainty about wind conditions, while Dr. Schneider's ballistic calculations required constant revision based on atmospheric readings that didn't match laboratory models. Conditions are deteriorating, Henrik reported, his voice tight with stress. Wind is gusting from multiple directions, and I'm seeing atmospheric distortion that's affecting range estimation. Weber's response was predictably institutional. Trust your equipment and training, Henrik. Execute the shot when conditions stabilize. But Juliette understood what Henrik was experiencing. Mountain shooting at extreme ranges created atmospheric effects that couldn't be calculated from sea-level laboratories or compensated for through expensive equipment. Success required real-time adaptation, based on experience that could only be gained through extensive practice under similar conditions. Her unauthorized training at the Academy's remote ranges had provided exactly that experience. She had learned to read alpine wind patterns by observing terrain features, to judge atmospheric density through scope mirage, to compensate for temperature inversions that affected ballistic trajectories in ways that theoretical calculations couldn't predict. The route to the Hernley Ridge required her to abandon the vehicle at a trailhead and hike through terrain that tested both her physical conditioning and navigation skills. Her months of solo training had prepared her for exactly this scenario, moving quickly through demanding alpine conditions while carrying precision shooting equipment that required careful protection. As she climbed toward her chosen shooting position, radio updates from the Academy team painted an increasingly desperate picture. Weather conditions were deteriorating faster than predicted. The climber's hypothermia was becoming critical, and Henrik was struggling with atmospheric complications that exceeded his training. "I need more time to calculate the wind effects," Henrik reported. "The conditions are beyond anything we covered in training. Time is a luxury we don't have," Weber replied. "Execute the shot based on best available data." Juliette reached her shooting position on the Hernley Ridge, just as afternoon sunlight began to fade behind the Matterhorn's imposing bulk. The shooting setup she'd planned during her map research proved even better than anticipated. A stable platform with clear line of sight to the climber's position, protected from the worst wind effects by the ridge's topography. She established her rifle position with the methodical precision that months of practice had made automatic. Her custom ammunition was already loaded and temperature stabilized. Her range estimation confirmed the 2,187-meter distance her calculations had predicted. Most importantly, the atmospheric conditions at her position were more stable than those affecting the Academy team's location. Through her scope, she could see the climber on his narrow ledge, a small figure against the mountain's massive face. At this distance, he appeared as barely more than a dot, but her preparation had taught her to judge target scale and calculate the precise adjustments required for success. Her radio crackled with another transmission from Henrik. "Sir, I'm not confident I can make this shot. The conditions are beyond my experience level, and I'm concerned about endangering the climber with a miss." Weber's response carried the strain of a commander facing mission failure. "Henrik, you're the best shooter we have. If you can't make the shot, then it can't be made." Juliette keyed her radio, knowing that her transmission would be heard by everyone monitoring the rescue frequency. "Academy Command, this is Juliette Moreau. I'm in position for an alternative shot solution." The response was immediate and sharp. "Moreau, what is your location?" "You were ordered to return to classes. I'm approximately 2,200 meters from the climber's position with optimal atmospheric conditions and equipment prepared specifically for this shot profile." Weber's voice carried barely controlled anger. "Moreau, you are not authorized for this operation. Cease all activities and return to base immediately." But as Juliette settled into her shooting position and began final preparations, she knew that authorization was no longer relevant. The climber's life depended on someone making an impossible shot, and she was the person best prepared to attempt it. The Academy team represented institutional authority and expensive equipment. She represented months of specialized preparation and documented capability that had been dismissed because it didn't fit their assumptions about what qualified students looked like. In the growing twilight of the alpine evening, With a man's life hanging in the balance, the question was no longer who was authorized to take the shot. The question was who could actually make it. The radio crackled with increasing urgency as Juliette completed her shooting preparations on the Hernley Ridge. Through the static, she could hear the Academy team's situation deteriorating in real time. Wind conditions are becoming impossible, Henrik reported, his voice tight with stress. I'm seeing gusts from 3 different directions, and the atmospheric distortion is making range estimation unreliable. Dr. Schneider's response carried scientific frustration. The mountain topography is creating microclimates that our models didn't account for. We may need to abort and wait for better conditions. Negative, Weber replied immediately. Weather forecasts show conditions worsening through the night. This may be our only window. Juliette settled into her final shooting position, her rifle stable on the custom rest she'd built from her pack and trekking poles. At 2,187 meters, the shot was still at the extreme edge of possibility, but her preparation had been designed for exactly these parameters. Her custom ammunition was loaded with temperature-stable powder that would perform consistently in alpine conditions, matched with bullets selected for their stability at extended flight times. Through her scope, the climber appeared as a tiny figure against the massive stone face of the Matterhorn. She could see the narrow ledge that had arrested his fall, barely 3 meters wide and covered with loose rock that made any movement dangerous. The rescue line would need to be placed within arm's reach, a precision requirement that demanded sub-OA accuracy at a distance where most shooters couldn't hit a car-sized target. Her range estimation confirmed the calculations she'd made during her approach. The atmospheric readings matched her experience from similar conditions during unauthorized training sessions. Most importantly, her position offered wind stability that the Academy team's location couldn't provide. Academy Command, Juliette keyed her radio. I have stable conditions and confirmed range to target. Request permission to attempt rescue shot. Weber's response was immediate and furious. Moreau, you are in violation of direct orders. Cease all activities and withdraw from the area. Lee. Sir, the Academy team is reporting impossible conditions. I have optimal shooting position with equipment proven at these ranges. Your equipment is not qualified for precision shooting at 2,000+ meters. This is not a training exercise where good enough is acceptable. Through her scope, Juliette could see the climber moving slightly, adjusting his position on the narrow ledge. His movements appeared increasingly unsteady, clear signs that hypothermia was advancing to dangerous levels. Time was running out regardless of institutional protocols. Henrik's voice cut through the command frequency with growing desperation. Sir, I cannot guarantee accuracy under these conditions. The wind patterns are beyond anything in my experience, and the atmospheric effects are affecting my scope tracking. Dr. Schneider's update was equally concerning. Ballistic calculations are becoming unreliable due to atmospheric instability. We may need to consider alternative approaches. But there were no alternative approaches. Weather was deteriorating. Conventional rescue methods had been ruled impossible, and the precision shooting solution required success on the first attempt. Failure meant watching a man die while rescue teams debated options that didn't exist. Juliette began her final shooting sequence, drawing on months of preparation that had anticipated exactly this scenario. Her breathing settled into the controlled rhythm she'd practiced thousands of times. Her natural point of aim aligned perfectly with the target. Her mental calculations accounted for wind, atmospheric density, temperature, and the dozen other variables that would determine success or failure. Final warning, Moreau. Weber's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. Withdraw immediately or face court-martial proceedings. Juliette switched off her radio. The shot solution crystallized in her mind with mathematical precision. Wind compensation, 2.3 mils left. Elevation adjustment, 47.2 mils up. Atmospheric correction, plus 1.1 mil for decreased air density. Each calculation was based on data she'd collected through months of meticulous preparation that others had dismissed as irrelevant. Enthusiasm. Her finger found the trigger with the familiar pressure she'd practiced until it was unconscious. The rifle's trigger had been adjusted to break at exactly 2.5 pounds with no perceptible travel. Her breathing cycle reached the natural pause between exhale and inhale. Her sight picture was perfect, crosshairs steady on a target, barely visible at the edge of human visual capability. The shot surprised her, as perfect shots always did. The rifle's recoil was absorbed by her body position, her scope returning to target without disturbing her sight picture. In the mountain stillness, the sound of the shot echoed off stone faces like thunder, then faded into silence. At 2,187 meters, the projectile's flight time was 4.2 seconds. Juliette maintained her shooting position, tracking through her scope, while counting the seconds. The specialized projectile carried a rescue line that would deploy upon impact, creating the lifeline the climber needed to survive. 1 second. The projectile was traveling at approximately 800 meters per second, already beyond the halfway point of its trajectory. 2 seconds. Atmospheric conditions were affecting the projectile's path, but her calculations had accounted for the variables that mattered most. 3 seconds. Through her scope, she could see the climber's position clearly, the narrow ledge that represented the margin for error in her shot placement. 4 seconds. The projectile should be approaching the target zone, its velocity still sufficient for effective accuracy despite the extreme range. 4.2 seconds. Impact. Through her scope, Juliette saw the rescue line deploy exactly as planned, draping across the ledge within easy reach of the climber. The specialized projectile had performed flawlessly, delivering the lifeline with precision that exceeded even her most optimistic calculations. The radio, which she had turned back on to monitor results, exploded with voices. Confirmed hit. Came an unfamiliar voice, probably Swiss rescue personnel monitoring from the climber's position. Line deployment successful. The climber has secured the rescue line. Weber's voice cut through the celebration, carrying a mixture of relief and barely controlled anger. Who took that shot? Henrik, confirm your status. Henrik's response was confused and embarrassed. Sir, I did not fire. Conditions were still impossible from our position. A long pause filled the radio frequency as the implications became clear. Someone had successfully made a shot that the Academy's best equipment and most advanced students had deemed impossible. Moreau. Weber's voice was dangerously quiet. Report your status. Juliette keyed her radio, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Shot successful, sir. Rescue line deployed accurately. The climber is secured. The silence that followed carried the weight of institutional assumptions, crashing against undeniable results. 3 weeks after the Matterhorn rescue, Juliette stood in the same briefing hall where she had once been excluded from advanced training discussions. But everything had changed. The Alpine Precision Academy's monthly newsletter featured her photograph on the front page under the headline, "Record-breaking rescue shot saves climber's life," and her technical analysis of extreme-range mountain shooting had been distributed to precision shooting schools across Europe. Weber's investigation into her unauthorized rescue had become something entirely different than anyone anticipated. Instead of disciplinary proceedings, it had evolved into a comprehensive review of the Academy's training methodologies and equipment prejudices. Her documentation of ballistic research, ammunition development, and atmospheric analysis had impressed external reviewers who were brought in to assess the incident. The Moreau case, as it became known in academic circles, challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between equipment cost and shooting capability. Her success with budget equipment had forced a recognition that student preparation and understanding of ballistic principles mattered more than institutional status indicators. Dr. Shader stood at the briefing room podium, addressing the gathering. That included not just academy students and instructors, but visiting experts from military precision shooting programs and civilian competitive organizations. The 2,187-meter rescue shot represents a breakthrough in our understanding of extreme-range shooting capabilities, he announced. Student Moreau's success required technical knowledge that exceeded anything in our curriculum achieved with equipment we had previously considered inadequate for advanced applications. Juliette sat in the front row, a position that would have been unthinkable months earlier, when she was relegated to the back during her brief inclusion in advanced classes. Her status had transformed from scholarship student struggling with institutional prejudices to recognized expert, whose techniques were being studied and incorporated into official training programs. Henrik approached her after the presentation, his manner carrying genuine respect rather than the patronizing politeness she had grown accustomed to. Juliette, I wanted to thank you personally. My equipment couldn't have made that shot under those conditions. But more importantly, I didn't have the knowledge to even attempt it properly. Your equipment was capable, Henrik. The challenge was understanding the atmospheric variables that theoretical training doesn't cover, which is why Weber has asked you to develop a new curriculum for extreme-range mountain shooting. He wants you to teach what you learned through your unauthorized research. The irony was perfect. The independent preparation that had been criticized as dangerous, overconfidence, was now being institutionalized as essential training. Her months of dismissed expertise were being recognized as advanced knowledge that the Academy needed to incorporate into its official programs. Marco joined their conversation, carrying the technical curiosity that had replaced his earlier dismissiveness. Your ammunition development results are remarkable. My father's manufacturing connections want to discuss your powder and bullet selection criteria. Apparently, your budget approach achieved consistency that some premium ammunition can't match. The transformation extended beyond individual relationships. The Academy had quietly revised its admission criteria to place greater emphasis on demonstrated preparation and technical knowledge rather than equipment specifications. Student evaluations now included assessment of independent research capabilities and understanding of ballistic principles that couldn't be purchased. Weber himself appeared, approaching with the measured respect of someone who had fundamentally reassessed his initial judgments. Mademoiselle Moreau, the Curriculum Development Committee has approved your proposal for the Advanced Mountain Precision Program. You'll begin instructor training next month. Instructor training. 6 months ago, she had been excluded from advanced student status. Now she was being prepared to teach techniques that had been developed through the very independent research that institutional protocols had discouraged. Sir, what about the students who need this training but don't have access to premium equipment? Weber's response reflected changed institutional priorities. The equipment loan program has been expanded significantly. We've also partnered with manufacturers who are interested in developing precision equipment that doesn't require substantial financial investment. The broader implications of her success were becoming apparent throughout the precision shooting community. Her techniques were being studied at military schools. Her ammunition development methods were being replicated by civilian competitors. And her success with budget equipment was challenging cost assumptions across the industry. Stefan approached with updates that would have seemed impossible during her months of isolation. Juliette, the technical committee wants to designate your rifle for the Academy's equipment museum. The Matterhorn rescue rifle will be displayed alongside historically significant precision shooting equipment. Her cheap junk rifle, dismissed as inadequate for serious precision work, was being preserved as an example of what could be accomplished when preparation overcame prejudice. But the most meaningful transformation was personal. As Juliette looked around the briefing hall at students and instructors who now sought her expertise rather than questioning her qualifications, she understood that proving herself had required more than making an impossible shot. It had required refusing to accept limitations imposed by others' assumptions about what she was capable of achieving. The Academy's evening newsletter included a follow-up story about the rescued climber's complete recovery and his gratitude to the unknown marksman who had saved his life. He had requested contact information to offer personal thanks, not knowing that his rescuer was a student who had been deemed unqualified for the very training that enabled her success. As the briefing concluded and students dispersed to their training activities, Juliette remained in the hall for a moment, reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. 6 months of exclusion, dismissal, and institutional prejudice had culminated in recognition that exceeded anything she had originally hoped to achieve. Her rifle case sat beside her chair, the same battered container that had once marked her as someone who didn't belong among serious precision shooters. Now it represented proof that belonging was something you earned through preparation and performance, not something you purchased through expensive equipment. The evening light streaming through the briefing hall windows reminded her of those early mornings when she had arrived at the academy carrying nothing but determination and equipment that others considered inadequate. The determination had proven sufficient. The equipment had exceeded everyone's expectations except her own. Sometimes, proving conventional wisdom wrong required permission from authorities. Sometimes it required expensive equipment and institutional support. And sometimes it required nothing more than the willingness to prepare thoroughly and execute precisely when opportunity arrived. Disguised as an impossible challenge, Juliette picked up her rifle case and walked toward the advanced training facility where tomorrow she would begin teaching other students that limitations were often assumptions waiting to be disproven by those prepared to exceed expectations. The shot that had saved the climber's life had also transformed the Academy's understanding of what was possible when skill mattered more than status. Preparation trumped prejudice, and accuracy was measured by results rather than equipment price tags. Her story would be told for years not just as a remarkable rescue, but as proof that sometimes the most qualified person is the one everyone least expects to succeed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.